Forget everything you think you know about Wild West revolvers. While everyone talks about Colts and peacemakers, the frontier was crawling with weapons so strange, so bizarre, they make modern firearms look ordinary. We're talking about revolvers you could squeeze in your palm, guns that combine knives with bullets, pistols that fired in multiple directions at once, and weapons so dangerous they could explode in your hand. Today, we're counting down the 15 most bizarre, unexpected, and flat-out weird revolvers that actually existed on the American frontier, and what you're about to discover will shatter every Hollywood myth you've ever believed about frontier firearms. The Apache Knuckle Duster, the outlaw's Swiss Army knife picture, a weapon that wasn't just a revolver. It was a knuckle duster, a knife, and a pistol all rolled into one grotesque package. The Apache revolver looked like it was designed in a fever dream, and it became the weapon of choice for criminals who needed versatility more than accuracy. Manufactured in France during the 1870s, this bizarre contraption featured a 6-shot pinfire cylinder mounted on a brass knuckle frame. But the truly insane part was the folding knife blade that extended from the frame, turning it into 3 weapons at once. Imagine squaring off in a saloon brawl, and your opponent pulls out what looks like brass knuckles, only to shoot you, stab you, and beat you all with the same device. The Apache had no barrel whatsoever. The cylinder sat exposed, and you fired by aligning it with your fist. This made accuracy nearly impossible beyond arm's length, but in the cramped confines of Parisian streets and later American gambling dens, it was devastatingly effective. The folding trigger had to be extended before firing, adding an extra step that could prove fatal in a fast-draw situation. Despite its impracticality, the Apache's intimidation factor was undeniable. Simply brandishing this nightmarish combination weapon was often enough to end confrontations before they began. French criminals called Apaches carried them religiously, and when a few made their way to American shores, they gained cult status among gamblers and outlaws who valued surprise over precision. But the Apache was temperamental. The pinfire cartridges were unreliable, the blade dulled quickly, and the brass knuckle frame bent under heavy impact. Still, no weapon quite captured the desperate, anything-goes spirit of frontier combat, like this bizarre French import. The Protector Palm Pistol, the squeezable killer. Imagine holding a weapon that didn't look like a gun at all. No barrel pointing forward, no trigger to pull, just a disc-shaped piece of metal that fit in your palm. Then imagine squeezing your fist and firing a bullet directly forward from between your fingers. Welcome to the world of the Protector Palm Pistol, one of the strangest firearms ever conceived. Patented in 1883 by Jacques Turbiot, the Protector resembled a pocket watch more than a weapon. Its circular design housed 7 chambers in a radial configuration, and the entire mechanism was activated by squeezing a lever in your palm. This squeeze action rotated the cylinder and fired the gun in one motion, making it theoretically faster than any traditional revolver. The Protector fired small-caliber rimfire rounds, typically 22 or 32 caliber. Its lack of a barrel meant accuracy was virtually non-existent beyond a few feet, but that wasn't the point. This was the ultimate concealed carry weapon for an era when surprise mattered more than stopping power. Women, gamblers, and businessmen carried them tucked in pockets or purses, confident that no one would recognize the bizarre disc as a firearm. But the Protector's design was fundamentally flawed. The squeeze mechanism required significant hand strength and often resulted in accidental discharges. The radial chambers meant spent cartridges had to be pried out individually, making reloading painfully slow. And without sights or a proper barrel, hitting anything on purpose was more luck than skill. Minneapolis police briefly considered adopting them for undercover work, but quickly abandoned the idea after officers reported the weapons were more dangerous to the shooter than to criminals. Original Protectors now rest in the Minneapolis Police Museum and the Smithsonian, testaments to innovation that went sideways. The Pepperbox Revolver, the multi-barrel monster. Before Samuel Colt perfected the rotating cylinder, gunsmiths tried a simpler solution. If you wanted multiple shots, just attach multiple barrels. The result was the pepperbox revolver, a weapon so bizarre it looked like someone glued 6 gun barrels together and called it a day. Pepperbox designs existed as early as the 1600s, but they hit American shores in force during the 1830s and 40s. Instead of 1 barrel and a rotating cylinder, these monsters featured 4 to 6 barrels that rotated together. Each barrel was its own complete firing chamber, loaded individually from the front with powder, ball, and cap. Picture pulling this bulky contraption from your belt. It weighed twice as much as a standard revolver, and its cluster of barrels made it impossibly front-heavy. When you thumbed back the hammer, the entire barrel assembly rotated to align the next loaded tube with the firing mechanism. Pull the trigger, and hope the right barrel fired. The pepperbox's accuracy was legendary for all the wrong reasons. The multiple barrels created an unpredictable center of gravity, and the lack of a proper front sight meant you were essentially pointing a cluster of tubes in the general direction of your target. Experienced shooters claim pepperboxes were only reliable within 10 feet, and even then you needed luck on your side. But in close quarter fights, the pepperbox was devastating. 6 barrels meant 6 chances to end it by confrontation, and the weapon's intimidating appearance often ended fights before they started. Stagecoach guards and riverboat gamblers favored them until Colt's revolvers proved that rotating cylinders beat rotating barrels every time. By the 1860s, pepperboxes had become relics, but they represented an important stepping stone in revolver evolution, proof that sometimes the strangest ideas pave the way for better ones. The turret revolver, the spinning death machine. What happens when an inventor looks at a traditional revolver and decides the cylinder is facing the wrong direction? You get the turret revolver, a weapon so strange that modern firearms experts struggle to explain why anyone thought it was a good idea. Turret revolvers, also called radial revolvers, position their cylinders horizontally instead of vertically. Picture a wheel lying flat, with chambers pointing outward in every direction, like the spokes of a wheel. As you fired, the cylinder rotated, bringing the next chamber into alignment with the barrel. The concept appeared in various patents throughout the 1840s and 50s, with inventors convinced this horizontal design offered advantages over Colt's vertical cylinder. The most famous was the Cochrane turret revolver, patented in 1837. It featured a horizontal disc-shaped cylinder with 7 or 9 chambers, each one a potential loaded gun pointing in a different direction at all times. Here's where things got terrifying. If the cylinder was loaded and a chamber misfired or cap sparked incorrectly, you could have a loaded gun chamber pointing directly at your own face, your hand, or straight backward toward your chest. Multiple documented cases exist of turret revolvers killing or maiming their owners when a chamber fired out of sequence. Despite these horrifying safety issues, some frontier shooters carried turret revolvers, attracted by their unique appearance and mechanical novelty. The horizontal design supposedly made them easier to carry flat in a pocket or waistband, and their unusual construction became a conversation piece among gun enthusiasts. But practical shooters quickly abandoned turret designs. The risk of having multiple loaded chambers pointing in unintended directions was simply too great. By the 1860s, turret revolvers had joined pepperboxes in the dustbin of failed firearm experiments, remembered only as bizarre curiosities from an era when gun design was still finding its way. The Dolny percussion revolver, the sideways nightmare. Imagine a revolver where the cylinder didn't rotate vertically or horizontally, but sat perpendicular to the barrel like some kind of mechanical tumor growing from the side of the gun. The Dolny percussion revolver achieved this bizarre configuration, creating one of the most visually disturbing firearms of the 19th century. Manufactured in Massachusetts during the 1850s, the Dolny featured a cylinder that extended outward from the frame at a 90-degree angle. When loaded, the chambers protruded from the side like a medieval mace, and rotating the cylinder required an awkward manual operation between shots. The supposed advantage was faster reloading. With the cylinder mounted sideways, shooters could theoretically load all chambers more easily, without fumbling to align them with a loading gate. The design created more problems than it solved. The protruding cylinder caught on clothing, holsters, and anything else nearby. The added weight on one side made the revolver handle like a lopsided brick. Firing the Dolny was an exercise in mechanical awkwardness. The heavy sideways cylinder created strange recoil characteristics, pulling the gun laterally with each shot. Accuracy suffered tremendously, and most shooters reported the weapon felt fundamentally wrong in their hands, as if they were fighting the gun itself with every shot. Only a few hundred Dolny revolvers were ever produced, and even fewer made it to the frontier. Those that did became curiosities, rather than serious fighting weapons. Cowboys who encountered them typically laughed at the bizarre design, preferring standard Colts or Remingtons that didn't look like they'd been assembled backward. Original Dolny revolvers now command high prices among collectors, not for their practicality, but for their sheer strangeness. They stand as testament to an era when gun designers tried every possible configuration, learning through expensive failures what didn't work. The harmonica pistol, the musical murder machine picture. A pistol with a magazine that slides horizontally across the top like a harmonica, feeding cartridges sideways into the chamber. The Jari harmonica pistol wasn't just bizarre in appearance. It was a mechanical nightmare that somehow found its way onto the American frontier. Invented by French gunsmith Jr. in the 1850s, the harmonica pistol used a sliding breech block that contained multiple chambers. This block, resembling a harmonica in shape and size, slid laterally after each shot, aligning the next loaded chamber with the fixed barrel. It was theoretically faster than rotating cylinder designs and more compact than pepperbox barrels. In reality, the harmonica pistol was a disaster. The sliding breech had to lock perfectly with the barrel to prevent gas leakage and maintain accuracy. Even minor dirt or debris could jam the mechanism, and frontier conditions guaranteed dirt and debris. Shooters reported that harmonica pistols fouled quickly and required meticulous cleaning after every use. Loading was equally problematic. Each chamber in the harmonica magazine had to be charged individually from the front, just like a muzzle loader, but with the added complication of ensuring the breech block aligned properly. One mistake and the weapon could detonate in your hand, or worse, fail to fire when you needed it most. Despite these glaring flaws, harmonica pistols developed a cult, following among European officers and wealthy American collectors who valued novelty over reliability. A few even made it west, carried by immigrants who quickly learned that frontier life demanded simpler, more dependable weapons. The harmonica design did influence later firearms development, particularly in repeating rifles, but as a pistol, it remained a bizarre footnote, proof that sometimes innovation creates complexity without corresponding benefits. Most frontier shooters who encountered them considered them expensive toys, better suited for display than combat. The volcanic pistol, the rocket ball revolution before Winchester perfected the lever-action rifle. They experimented with something far stranger. The volcanic pistol represented one of the most ambitious and bizarre attempts to create a repeating handgun, using ammunition that looked like miniature rockets and a lever mechanism that belonged on a rifle. Manufactured by the Volcanic Repeating Arms Company in the 1850s, this pistol featured a tubular magazine under the barrel and a prominent lever beneath the trigger guard. Work the lever and it chambered around, cocked the hammer, and ejected the spent cartridge. For the era, it was cutting-edge technology wrapped in a bizarre package. But the real strangeness was the ammunition. Volcanic pistols fired rocket ball cartridges, hollow-based bullets containing their own powder charge. No separate brass casing existed. The bullet itself was the cartridge, propelled by powder packed into its hollow base. This innovative design allowed for magazine feeding but created devastating reliability problems. The rocket ball's powder charge was painfully weak. Shooters reported that volcanic pistols had less stopping power than a good slingshot. The bullets often failed to penetrate heavy clothing, let alone deliver the decisive impact needed in a gunfight. Against an armed opponent, a volcanic pistol was more likely to annoy them than stop them. The design also suffered from gas leakage. Without a proper brass cartridge to seal the chamber, hot gases escaped backward, burning the shooter's hand and fouling the mechanism. After a few shots, residue built up until the action jammed completely. Despite these failures, the volcanic pistol influenced firearms history significantly. The company evolved into Winchester repeating arms, and lessons learned from the rocket ball led directly to the development of proper metallic cartridges. But as a frontier weapon, the volcanic remained a bizarre curiosity, too innovative for its own good. The chain pistol, the forgotten failure. Imagine a revolver without a cylinder. Instead, chambers were linked together in a chain that fed through the frame like a bicycle chain. This was the chain pistol, one of the most mechanically complex and thoroughly impractical firearms ever conceived. Patented in France during the 1860s, chain pistols featured individual chambers connected by metal links. As the shooter advanced the mechanism, these chambers fed through the frame one at a time, aligning with the barrel and firing pin. Think of it as a proto-machine gun belt feeding system, scaled down to revolver size. The theoretical advantages were obvious. A chain could hold more rounds than a traditional cylinder, and replacing an empty chain was potentially faster than reloading individual chambers. Some designs allowed for chains of 10 or even 15 rounds, giving the shooter unprecedented capacity for the era. But theory crashed hard against reality. The chain mechanism required precise engineering that 1860s manufacturing couldn't deliver consistently. Chains bent, links separated, and chambers misaligned with terrifying regularity. Dirt or damage to any single link could jam the entire system, turning the pistol into an expensive paperweight. Even worse, the chain design created unpredictable pressure points. Unlike a solid cylinder that distributed force evenly, chains flexed and shifted under firing pressure. This led to gas leakage, barrel misalignment, and in some documented cases, catastrophic failures that injured or killed shooters. Very few chain pistols made it to America, and those that did quickly disappeared from use. Frontier conditions guaranteed rapid mechanical failure, and replacement chains were impossible to find outside major European cities. The few surviving examples rest in museums, regarded as fascinating failures that proved sometimes the simplest designs work best. The knife pistol, the blade shooter hybrid. What do you get when you combine a knife with a percussion revolver? A weapon that does neither job particularly well but looks absolutely terrifying. Knife-pistol combinations proliferated throughout the 1840s and 50s, each design more bizarre than the last. These hybrid weapons typically featured a standard percussion revolver with a large blade extending from beneath the barrel or alongside the frame. The idea was simple. Why carry two weapons when one could serve both purposes? In practice, these combinations created more problems than they solved. The most common design mounted a Bowie-style blade below the barrel, creating a weapon that looked like a revolver had been grafted onto a knife, or vice versa. Some versions used folding blades that extended from the frame, while others featured fixed blades that made holstering nearly impossible. A few truly bizarre examples mounted the blade above the barrel, defeating any practical use of the gun's sights. Weight distribution was a nightmare. Adding a heavy blade to a revolver destroyed the gun's balance, making accurate shooting nearly impossible. The extra weight also made quick draws awkward and slow. Meanwhile, using the knife required gripping the gun portion, which was both uncomfortable and dangerous if the weapon was loaded. Real gunfighters recognized these hybrids as novelties. Jim Bowie himself allegedly owned a knife-pistol combination, though whether he ever actually used it in combat remains questionable. Most frontier shooters preferred to carry a good knife and a good gun separately rather than compromise both. Yet knife pistols persisted throughout the Wild West era, popular among gamblers and showmen who valued their intimidating appearance. Original examples now command premium prices at auctions, though collectors prize them for their strangeness, rather than their effectiveness. They remain perfect symbols of an era when inventors tried every conceivable combination. The duck's foot pistol, the multi-target mayhem maker. Picture a pistol with 4 barrels splayed outward like the webbed foot of a duck, each one pointing in a slightly different direction. Fire once, and you discharge all 4 barrels simultaneously, filling an entire room with lead. The duck's foot pistol wasn't designed for accuracy. It was designed for crowd control. Originally developed for British naval officers facing mutinous crews in confined ships, duck's foot pistols reached American shores during the early 1800s. Their bizarre fan barrel arrangement meant a single shot could hit multiple targets, or at least intimidate an entire group into submission. The typical configuration featured 4 barrels radiating from a central firing mechanism, though some designs used 3 or even 5 barrels. Each barrel was loaded individually with powder and ball, and a single percussion cap or flintlock mechanism fired all barrels at once. The splayed pattern meant bullets would spread across a wide arc, roughly 90 degrees from left to right. Stagecoach guards and prison wardens found duck's foot pistols particularly useful. When facing multiple threats in close quarters, the ability to engage several targets simultaneously provided a psychological and tactical advantage. The distinctive appearance alone often ended confrontations before they began. But the duck's foot was a one-shot weapon with spectacular limitations. Reloading 4 barrels under pressure was nearly impossible. The simultaneous discharge of all barrels created massive recoil that could break wrists or knock the gun from a shooter's hand, and the spread pattern meant you were as likely to hit bystanders as intended targets. By the 1860s, repeating revolvers had made multi-barrel designs obsolete. Duck's foot pistols became oddities, occasionally carried by lawmen in particularly rough districts, but largely abandoned by practical shooters. Original examples survive in maritime museums and private collections, bizarre relics of an era when volume of fire trumped precision. The Japanese Nambu Baby, the Eastern Invader Weight, a Japanese pistol in the American Wild West? Absolutely. The Nambu Baby pistol, though designed decades after the frontier era ended, made its way into the hands of American collectors and shooters during the early 1900s, becoming one of the most bizarre late additions to Western firearms history. Designed by Kijiro Nambu in 1902, the Baby Nambu was a scaled-down version of his military pistol, chambered in 7mm Nambu. It was tiny, weighing less than 2 pounds and firing cartridges barely more powerful than a .22. Japanese officers carried them as backup weapons, but American collectors became fascinated by their unusual Eastern design. The Baby Nambu looked nothing like Western revolvers. Its automatic action, exposed barrel, and grip angle were completely foreign to shooters raised on Colts and Remingtons. The pistol used a recoil-operated mechanism that American gunsmiths found unnecessarily complex, and its tiny cartridge inspired more ridicule than respect. But what made the Baby Nambu truly bizarre in the American context was its impracticality. The 7mm Nambu round was virtually impossible to find in the United States. Shooters who owned these pistols often couldn't fire them due to ammunition scarcity. Those who did manage to shoot them reported anemic performance that would barely discourage an angry dog, let alone a human opponent. Western gun collectors acquired Baby Nambus as curiosities, examples of how differently firearms evolved in Eastern cultures. A few even made it to the Southwest Territories in the early 1900s, carried by Japanese immigrants or American soldiers returning from Pacific deployments. Today, Baby Nambus represent the bizarre intersection of Eastern and Western firearms cultures. They were never truly Wild West weapons, but their presence in American gun collections from the era makes them honorary members of this strange fraternity. The Gaulois Palm Pistol, the French fist fighter. The French weren't done creating bizarre pistols after the Apache. The Gaulois Palm Pistol took the squeeze-to-fire concept and refined it into something even stranger. This weapon looked like a metal bar you'd use for exercise, but it could fire 5 shots without anyone realizing you were armed. Manufactured in the 1890s by the Manufrance Company, the Gaulois featured a horizontal cylinder contained within a tubular frame. You gripped it with your entire fist, barrel extending forward from between your middle fingers, and squeezed the entire grip to fire. No visible trigger, no hammer, nothing that screamed "gun" to casual observers. The Gaulois fired 8mm rounds, significantly more powerful than the tiny cartridges used in the Protector. This gave it actual stopping power at close range, making it a legitimate defensive weapon rather than just a noisemaker. The cylinder held 5 rounds, each one ejected automatically after firing, but operating a Gaulois required strength and practice. The squeeze mechanism demanded significant grip pressure, and recoil transmitted directly into your palm with each shot. Shooters reported that firing all 5 rounds rapidly left their hands bruised and sore. The lack of sights made aiming intuitive at best, though at the distances this weapon was designed for, you were essentially point shooting anyway. A few Gaulois pistols reached America through French immigrants and firearms importers. They never achieved the popularity of traditional revolvers, but they attracted attention from gamblers and undercover operatives who needed maximum concealment. The Gaulois represented the peak of palm pistol design, but it still couldn't compete with conventional handguns for practical use. Original examples now rest in French military museums and American collections specializing in European oddities, testament to an evolutionary dead end in firearms development. The miniature Colt, the gambler's ace. While most bizarre revolvers were strange by design, some were bizarre simply because of their size. Miniature Colt revolvers, scaled down to absurd proportions, became status symbols among gamblers and wealthy frontiersmen who valued novelty over firepower. Colt never officially produced these tiny guns. They were created by skilled gunsmiths who painstakingly replicated full-size Colts at 1/3 or even 1/4 scale. Every component was hand-fitted, every mechanism perfectly functional, creating revolvers that could fit in a watch pocket, yet still fire actual ammunition. These miniatures typically chambered 22 short cartridges, the smallest practical ammunition available. With barrels barely an inch long and cylinders that held 5 or 6 rounds, they were more proof of craftsmanship than serious weapons. Yet they functioned perfectly, accurate to several feet, and capable of delivering a painful, if not lethal, surprise. Gamblers loved them. A miniature Colt hidden in a vest pocket or up a sleeve provided one final option when a game went bad. The psychological impact of producing a tiny yet functional revolver often shocked opponents into submission, buying precious seconds to escape or negotiate, but their small size created serious limitations. The tiny grip made them difficult to hold steadily, and minuscule sights were practically useless. Recoil, while not painful, was disproportionately strong for such small guns, and the .22 short cartridge, while capable of causing injury, lacked the stopping power needed in a real gunfight. Creating these miniatures required hundreds of hours of skilled labor, making them expensive luxuries. Only wealthy collectors and successful gamblers could afford them. Original miniature Colts now sell for tens of thousands of dollars at auction, valued far more for their craftsmanship than their practical utility. They remain the ultimate symbol of form over function. The Cochrane Turret Revolver, the horizontal horror. We mentioned turret revolvers earlier, but the Cochrane deserves special recognition as perhaps the most successful failure in firearms history. Patented in 1837 by John Webster, Cochrane, this bizarre weapon actually saw limited military and civilian use despite being fundamentally dangerous. The Cochrane's horizontal disc-shaped cylinder held 7 to 9 chambers arranged like a wheel. Each chamber was its own complete barrel and firing mechanism, sealed with a percussion cap. The entire disc rotated horizontally, bringing each chamber into alignment with a fixed firing pin. What made the Cochrane particularly terrifying was that all chambers were always loaded and capped. As the disc rotated, you literally had loaded gun barrels pointing in every direction, including straight at your own face. Chain fire, where sparks from one chamber ignited adjacent chambers, could turn the weapon into a fragmenting grenade. Despite this horror show waiting to happen, the Cochrane attracted buyers. The United States Navy ordered a small quantity in the 1840s, issuing them to officers for boarding actions. Civilians purchased them as well, attracted by their novel design and the prestige of owning such an unusual weapon. Period accounts document multiple incidents of Cochrane revolvers malfunctioning catastrophically. One naval officer reportedly lost 3 fingers when his Cochrane chain fired during a training exercise. Another account describes a civilian whose Cochrane exploded during a duel, killing him instantly. By the 1850s, safer designs had rendered the Cochrane obsolete. Surviving examples are extremely rare, most having been destroyed in accidents or intentionally retired as too dangerous. Those that remain in museums stand as cautionary tales, reminders that innovation without safety considerations can prove deadly. The Cochrane represented the absolute peak of bizarre revolver design, the weapon that proved sometimes ideas are too strange to succeed. The LeMat Grapeshot Revolver, the ultimate bizarre champion. The number one spot belongs to a weapon so bizarre, so audacious in its design, it makes every other strange revolver look timid by comparison. The LeMat Grapeshot Revolver combined a 9-shot percussion revolver with a smoothbore shotgun barrel, creating a 2-in-1 weapon that was equal parts genius and madness. Dr. Jean-Alexandre François LeMay, a French expatriate living in New Orleans, patented this monster in 1856. The design was deceptively simple. A standard 9-shot cylinder rotating around a central barrel, but that central barrel wasn't for bullets. It was a 20-gauge shotgun barrel loaded with buckshot, or a single massive ball. Picture facing an opponent with a LeMat. He fires 9 revolver rounds at you and your companions, then flips a lever on the hammer and unleashes a shotgun blast that could stop a charging horse. It was the ultimate combat multiplier, combining the sustained fire of a revolver with the devastating close-range power of a scattergun. Confederate officers recognized the LeMat's potential immediately. General J.E.B. Stuart famously carried one, as did dozens of cavalry commanders who valued its dual-purpose design. But the LeMat was expensive to manufacture and complicated to maintain, limiting its widespread adoption. The revolver functioned exactly as intended, proving that bizarre didn't mean impractical. The only real drawback was weight. At over 3 pounds loaded, the LeMat was nearly twice as heavy as a Colt Army. But for those who could handle it, the weapon delivered unmatched firepower. Original LeMats now command astronomical prices at auction, recognized as the most successfully bizarre revolver ever created. It proved that sometimes the strangest ideas work brilliantly. In a world of bizarre revolvers, the LeMat stands alone as the weapon that was strange enough to become legendary. 15 bizarre revolvers, each one stranger than the last. From squeeze-to-fire palm pistols to revolvers with cylinders pointing sideways, from knife gun combinations to weapons that fired in multiple directions simultaneously. These weren't just failed experiments or gunsmith fever dreams. They were real weapons carried by real people on the frontier who bet their lives on bizarre innovation. The strange truth is that many of these designs failed not because they were bad ideas, but because they were ahead of manufacturing capabilities or simply too specialized for general use. Others failed because they were genuinely terrible concepts that should never have left the drawing board. Either way, they represent a fascinating chapter in firearms history that Hollywood completely ignored. Every bizarre revolver tells a story about innovation, desperation, and the constant search for advantage in a world where your weapon choice could mean the difference between legend and grave. That's the real Wild West, stranger than any movie dared to show.